Sing Mozart and I'll marry you." The words cut through the obsidian room like a blade. Only minutes earlier, the room had been anything but silent. Elena Vance stood near the center table, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her apron that her knuckles had gone white. She was shaking. No, run. The kind of trembling that came from fear rather than cold, and she could feel it in her knees, her wrists, the thin line of her throat. She had already apologized once, then twice, then again, her voice breaking each time. "I'm so sorry, Miss Thorne," Elena said, her head bowed, eyes lowered the way she had learned to do. "I was bumped from behind. It was an accident. Please don't have me fired." Isabella Thorne laughed. Not loudly, not theatrically. It was worse than that. A thin, contemptuous sound, like someone flicking ash from a cigarette. "An accident?" Isabella repeated, standing up slowly. Her red silk dress, custom couture, imported, irreplaceable, was stained dark with wine across the bodice. She looked Elena up and down, taking in the cheap black uniform, the scuffed shoes, the frayed collar. "Girls like you always have accidents." Elena's mouth opened, then closed. Her heart slammed painfully against her ribs. Around them, heads turned, eyes watched, some curious, some amused. "Do you have any idea," Isabella continued, her voice rising just enough to carry, "how much this dress costs? It's more than you make in a year, possibly two." "I'll pay for it," Elena said, the words tumbling out in desperation. "I'll work extra shifts. That did it. Laughter rippled across the table. A man in a tailored suit snorted into his glass. Another leaned toward his companion and whispered something that made her smile behind her hand. "Pay for it?" someone scoffed. "With what talent?" Elena's felt the heat rush to her face. She was acutely aware of how small she looked among them, how alone. The obsidian room was a cathedral to wealth, chandeliers, dripping light like frozen tears, walls lined with polished stone, the air perfumed with truffle oil and entitlement. She had learned to be invisible here. Tonight, she was painfully seen. "Marcus," Isabella snapped, summoning the floor manager without even turning her head. "I want her gone immediately, and I don't want to see her anywhere in Manhattan again." Marcus appeared, sweating, nodding too quickly. "Of course, Miss Thorne. Elena, you'll need to—" "Please," Elena whispered. She surprised herself by sinking slightly at the knees, not kneeling, but close enough to humiliation that her pride screamed in protest. "I need this job. I take care of my family. Please don't—" Someone laughed again. Julian Blackwood hadn't said a word yet. He sat back in his chair, watching the scene with distant interest, as if it were a mildly entertaining play running too long. The city's most eligible billionaire, 32, devastatingly composed, he swirled his wine, eyes half-lidded. "Does she even have any real skills?" a man at the table asked lightly. "Besides spilling things," another voice chimed in, cruel and playful. "Careful, she might cry on your shoes." Then it happened. As Elena shifted her weight, trying to steady herself, a foot slid out quick, subtle, deliberate, and caught her ankle. She gasped as her balance vanished. The bottle in her hand tilted, wine splashing across the tablecloth. Droplets scouring like blood, she barely caught herself on the edge of the table. Heart racing, breath gone. Laughter exploded. Real laughter now, unchecked. Isabella smiled. Elena stood frozen, every nerve on fire. "Don't cry, don't cry, don't give them that." Julian finally stood. "Enough," he said mildly, though there was no real heat in the word. He stepped closer, his presence commanding attention the way gravity commands matter. He glanced at Isabella, then at Elena, and something like boredom crossed his face. "You want me to forgive her clumsiness?" he asked, voice carrying. "Fine." He turned toward the small stage where the string quartet had just finished playing. On the music stand lay a forgotten sheet of music. Julian plucked it up, unfolding it with a careless flick of his wrist. "You want to keep your job?" he said to Elena. "Sing this Mozart aria perfectly, and I'll marry you." The room erupted. Cruel laughter, sharp laughter, the laughter of people who knew exactly who held power and enjoyed watching it flex. Julian lifted the page, displaying it like a challenge. Der Hullerash, the queen of the night, the graveyard of sopranos. Elena stared at the notes. They stared back. Something inside her shifted. "Does the orchestra know the key?" she asked. The laughter faltered just a little. Julian blinked. "What?" "D minor," Elena said, lifting her chin for the first time that night. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Do they know it?" A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Julian studied her now, really studied her. The trembling had stopped. Her shoulders were straight, her eyes dark, steady held his. "They're Philharmonic backups," he said slowly. "They know it." Elena nodded once. "Good." She walked to the stage. Each step felt unreal, like walking out of her own body and into a life she had sworn never to touch again. The pianist looked at her with concern. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "D minor," she replied. "Fast tempo. Don't wait for me." The first chord struck. Elena closed her eyes and sang. The sound that burst from her throat was not tentative, it was not hopeful, it was absolute. A blade of sound that sliced through the obsidian room and pinned every soul in place. Julian's glass froze halfway to his mouth. Isabella's smile died. Elena soared through the aria with terrifying precision, her voice a weapon forged from years of silence, loss, and swallowed rage. When the final note fell, the room was dead quiet. Then Julian began to clap, slowly, deliberately. Elena turned and ran, and Julian Blackwood, for the first time in years, felt something wake up inside his chest. If this moment gave you chills, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. You never know who else nearby is watching too. Elena didn't stop running until her lungs burned. She pushed through the swinging doors of the kitchen, past the stunned sous chefs and gawking dishwashers, down the narrow back corridor lined with crates of produce and racks of wine glasses. The cool air of the alley hit her face like a slap. She leaned against the brick wall and pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She had sung, not quietly, not halfway. She had opened her mouth and let 3 years of silence erupt like thunder in a room full of the most powerful people in the city. And now what? Her knees buckled. She slid to the ground, breathing hard, adrenaline crashing through her like a storm. Her fingers were still curled, as if clinging to invisible notes. Her ears rang not from the music, but from the memory of Julian's slow, deliberate applause. Not mocking, not amused, something else. Appreciative, terrifying. She buried her face in her hands. What had she done? Elena had spent the last 3 years disappearing, scrubbing floors, waiting tables, sleeping in hospital chairs beside her younger brother. She had buried the name Vankova so deep that even she forgot how it sounded. Now it was all coming back. The cold brick behind her did little to cool the fire in her veins. She tried to steady her breath, tried to remember why she had stopped singing in the first place. But all she could hear was that first note. Sharp, unapologetic, alive. A voice startled her. "Elena Marcus!" The floor manager stormed out the back door. "What the hell was that?" "I'm sorry," she said automatically, her eyes still wet. "You embarrassed the entire restaurant," he snapped, adjusting his sweating collar. "Do you even realize what kind of guests were out there?" "I do," she said, pulling herself to her feet. "And one of them humiliated me in front of all the others." "Well, maybe you shouldn't have dumped a bottle of Pinot Noir on a billionaire's fiancé." "I didn't." She stopped. What was the point? He wouldn't believe her. No one had. "You're done here," he continued, pointing toward the alleyway like it was exile. "And don't bother putting me down as a reference. You'll be lucky to find work at a diner in Queens." Elena didn't argue. She didn't plead this time. She simply turned and walked away, her shoes echoing on the pavement. The subway ride back to Hell's Kitchen was a blur. She kept her head low, arms wrapped tight around herself. The late-night train was mostly empty, just a few night shift workers and a man sleeping under his coat. She stared out the window as the dark tunnels rushed by, trying not to think about the dozens of eyes that had watched her, judged her, measured her, and then applauded. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, pausing outside the battered blue door. Apartment 4B, a place that smelled like old carpet and hope inside. The soft beeping of medical equipment hummed through the dim living room. She closed the door quietly and tiptoed toward the bedroom. "Elena," a weak voice called. She peeked in. Leo lay in bed, pale and thin, his arm taped to a line feeding into the dialysis machine. "Hey," she whispered. "You're home early." She crossed the room and sat beside him, brushing his damp curls off his forehead. "Yeah, I quit." His eyes widened. "What happened?" "I made a scene." He looked at her with the kind of understanding only someone who has also lived through humiliation can offer. "Want to talk about it?" "Not yet," she said softly, "but soon." He nodded. "Did they fire you because of the song?" She froze. "What do you mean?" "You were singing when you came in, under your breath. You do that sometimes when you're not thinking." She laughed quietly, covering her face. "God, I didn't realize." He smiled, weak but sincere. "I like it when you sing." A lump rose in her throat. She squeezed his hand gently. "Get some sleep, okay? I'll figure out what's next." "Oh, Z." She left the room and curled up on the couch, pulling a thin blanket over her shoulders. Her apron still smelled like wine and embarrassment. She stared at the ceiling until her eyes refused to stay open. By morning, the video had gone viral. It wasn't supposed to be filmed, but someone always had a phone. A waitress, a billionaire, a dare, a voice. It was all too good. A headline wrapped in fantasy and scandal. "Sing Mozart and I'll marry you," the caption read. The clip ended with the high F that made even trained sopranos flinch. But this girl, this waitress, she owned it. Thousands of comments, millions of views, and one man in a penthouse with a glass of scotch in hand, watching the video for the 7th time. Julian Blackwood sat at his sleek glass desk, his laptop open beside a manila folder stamped with the seal of a private investigative firm. "She's not who she pretended to be," Arthur said, placing another sheet in front of him. Julian scanned it. Elena Vankova, age 24, former Juilliard prodigy. Scandal, rumors, disappearance. She's been hiding in plain sight. Arthur nodded. 3 years. Changed her last name to Vance, works 2 jobs, lives with her brother Leo. He's an end-stage renal failure. Julian leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "And the scandal? Fabricated," Arthur said. "Trace the rumors back to a PR firm owned by the Thorne family with—" "Yes." Julian's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "Isabella," he said coldly. "She buried her." Julian stood, turning to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally he said, "Find out where she lives." Arthur blinked. "Now." Julian didn't turn around. "Yes, now." A few hours later, in a worn-out apartment in Hell's Kitchen, someone knocked on Elena's door. A heavy knock. Not the landlord, not a neighbor. She peeked through the peephole. Julian Blackwood. She froze. He knocked again, slower this time. "Elena," he said calmly through the door. "We need to talk." She didn't move, didn't breathe. "Elena, if you don't open this door, I'll have my head of security pick the lock." Her fingers hovered over the deadbolt. He waited. "Elena," he said again, his voice lower now. "You sang last night, but now it's my turn." She unlocked the door. Elena opened the door no more than 3 inches, just enough for the chain to stretch taut. The hallway beyond smelled like dust and boiled rice. Julian Blackwood stood there in the same tuxedo from the night before, though the bow tie was gone and his collar undone. His dark hair looked like he had run a hand through it too many times. Even out of place, he radiated presence, a man born into wealth, used to control, and utterly unbothered by locked doors. He didn't blink at the sight of the chain. He simply looked at her, studying the dark circles under her eyes, the dried streaks of exhaustion on her cheeks, the frayed hem of the apron still clinging to her waist. "You didn't run far enough," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be here," she replied, her voice low, firm. "Maybe," he said, but I am. She exhaled through her nose, debating. The chain stayed on. I don't have anything to say to you, she said. Then don't, Julian replied smoothly. Just listen. Elena didn't answer. A long beat passed. If you'd like, he added, his voice more pointed, now we can discuss your brother's dialysis treatments out here. I'm sure your neighbors would love to hear about the overdue invoices from Mount Sinai. Her blood froze. What do you know about my brother? I know he's 20. I know he's on a donor list that moves slower than molasses, and I know that without a miracle, he won't see 30. And quite dependous. She slammed the door shut instinctively, then hesitated. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened. He had spoken like a man who already knew too much. Elena's fingers hovered over the chain. A voice came from behind her. Weak sleep blurred. Elena! Who is it? She turned toward the bedroom. Leo, Elena, Julian said, this time with an edge of gentleness. Let me in 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She unhooked the chain and opened the door, but only slightly wider. Julian stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He didn't gawk at the tiny living room or the peeling wallpaper or the boxes of discounted medication on the coffee table. He didn't sit either, just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on hers. Why are you here? She asked. He pulled a thin manila folder from his coat. Because you're not just a waitress. She tensed. You're Elena Vankova, he continued, his voice unreadable. Top of your class at Juilliard, a voice that once made the Met look twice, until one night during your conservatory debut, you collapsed on stage and suddenly the headlines changed. Drug rumors, meltdown, no one looked deeper. I don't want to talk about that, she said, backing away. He didn't move closer. Of course you don't. They turned you into a cautionary tale, a broken prodigy. But it was all manufactured. She stared at him. I found the trail, Julian said. The smear campaign came from a PR firm under the Thorne Group umbrella, and during that same year, their daughter, a certain mezzo-soprano named Isabella Thorne, just happened to lose the leading role to a certain Elena Vankova. Elena's breath caught. I don't know what you're trying to do, she whispered. You want to make this into a pity project. You feel bad for the girl you embarrassed in front of your rich friends, so now you want to fix her. No, he said bluntly. I don't do pity. I do strategy. She blinked. Excuse me? I need a wife, he said like he was reading the weather. My grandfather's trust has a clause. I must be married by my 33rd birthday to assume full control of Blackwood Dynamics. That birthday is in 21 days. You're joking, Elena said flatly. I don't joke, Julian replied, especially not about 10 billion. She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. And you're here. Why? You want me to marry you? You already did the impossible once, he said. You sang Mozart like it was war. You didn't run. You didn't cry. You stood there and burned. That's the kind of person I need standing next to me. Strong, smart, and currently the only person in this city who hates Isabella Thorne as much as I do. Elena's laugh came out bitter and cracked. Let me get this straight. You want me to marry you so you can inherit your fortune and get revenge on your ex? Partly, Julian admitted, but also because I think the two of us could make each other untouchable. Why would I agree to this? He opened the folder, pulled out a check already signed. You're $62,000 in debt. Your brother's treatment is 2 steps away from being denied for non-payment. I can clear that by noon. Transfer him to the best private wing in Mount Si, full specialist team. Elena stared at the paper. The number was obscene. This is a contract, she whispered. Yes, he said. 1 year. No physical expectations. Separate bedrooms. You play the part of Mrs. Blackwood. Public appearances, board dinners, galas. You wear the ring. I keep the company. You walk away with 10 million. Her throat felt dry. And after a year, we divorce quietly? You go back to your life or don't change it. Do whatever you want. No strings, no lawsuits, no press leaks, and the singing, only if you want to. But I think, he added softly, that silencing your voice is what's been killing you. She looked at the check again, then at Julian. She thought of Leo's pale face, the nights of heating pads and expired pills, the afternoons spent choosing between groceries and medicine. Then she met Julian's eyes, Cool, commanding, but not cruel. 1 year? She asked. 1 year? He said. And we're strictly professional. You don't get to own me. He almost smiled. Understood. Elena inhaled sharply. Fine. Drop the papers. But I want it in writing, clause by clause. And I want a line that says we sleep in different wings. Already included, he said, holding out the file. I came prepared. She grabbed it, flipping through the pages, eyes darting over the language like a lawyer in court. After a moment, she whispered, You're insane. Possibly, Julian said. So are you. A beat, she looked up. I'll do it for Leo, not for you. Julian nodded once. Then pack a bag, Mrs. Blackwood. We've got a wedding to stage. Elena packed in silence. She moved through the apartment with mechanical focus, folding clothes she barely wore, placing them into a battered duffel bag that had seen better decades. Each motion felt unreal, like she was watching herself from a distance. Julian stood near the door, giving her space, checking his watch only once. You don't need much, he said. Everything you'll need is already waiting. That's not comforting, she replied without looking at him. He accepted that. She paused at Leo's bedroom door. The machine hummed steadily, a sound that had become the metronome of her life. She stepped inside and sat on the edge of his bed. I'm going to be gone for a bit, she said softly. Leo opened his eyes. Like, gone? No, she said quickly. Just staying somewhere else, a better place with better doctors. He studied her face the way he always did when he sensed half-truths. Is this about the man at the door? Yes. Is he trouble? She smiled faintly. He is complicated. Leo nodded, then surprised her by squeezing her hand with more strength than she expected. Then be careful, and sing if you need to. Her throat tightened. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. I promise. 20 minutes later, they were in Julian's car, gliding through the city streets like ghosts. The driver didn't speak. The windows were tinted. New York passed by in streaks of light. Bodegas closing, taxis honking, couples arguing on corners. A world she knew. A world she was leaving. At least for now. You can still walk away, Julian said suddenly, his gaze fixed forward. Up until the papers are signed. And after, he exhaled. After,